This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Well, welcome everyone, and I'm glad that we could get so many people out to see this the second episode, second session of the VDC for Me series. Today we're going to be talking about VDC Vault, and we have a special guest, Tim Smith. He's a principal solutions architect with Veeam, and he'll be walking through some of the new features and why you need VDC. So today we're actually very lucky to have two Veeam MVPs in this session, Michael Paul and Tim Smith. Yeah, so Michael, do you want to join in?
Yeah, so I'm Michael. I'm a solution engineer actually on the VDC team, so specializing in Microsoft 365 primarily. And one of the best parts of this job is getting to speak to the community, getting to speak to the customers, and Veeam Data Cloud's growing all the time. It's great to get that feedback and help make this a better product. Over to you, Tim.
Yeah, like Ann said, I'm over at Veeam. I've been here about 8 years now, principal solutions architect, formerly Veeam Vanguard, so very, very familiar and still very involved with the Veeam community. And yeah, it's nice to just see some familiar faces.
Yeah. So I thought we'd just start with a little bit of an icebreaker. We're going to be talking about Vault, and I thought it'd be good to go over what your favorite or what is a heist movie that you've watched that you've enjoyed recently. I'm going to start off. I really like the movie Army of Thieves. I don't know if you've seen it. It's kind of tied in with the Army of the Dead movie. It's kind of a prequel, so it kind of hits a lot of the right notes for me. It's kind of an underdog guy that's a little awkward, and it's the vaults are all named after Wagner operas, so it's a little geeky and fun, and it ties back in with so it answers some of the questions that are brought up in the Army of the Dead zombie movie, which is another kind of genre that I really enjoy. So yeah, if you see it out there, it's an entertaining movie to watch. What about you, Michael?
Sounds good. I've not seen it. I've heard of it, so it's one of those that's on the watch list. With young kids, it's very hard to sit
Hmm.
down and watch movies, which is why my one, I'm going to be winding the clocks back a little bit. Inception. I
Oh,
don't know if you want to fully call it a heist movie, but what they do there certainly, it's an amazing film. You know, Christopher Nolan kind of at his best, multiple layers of depth. You can watch through it and always find something new. And I think that that's one of those films that is a bit of a gem. You know, it rewards you eyes open, thinking what's going on. How about you, Tim?
Yeah, I didn't even think about Inception as being a heist movie, but it
hmm.
is. The first one that came to mind was, if you remember, The Italian Job, just
Yeah.
because I really like car chase scenes. So I mean, you
It,
can't beat that for car chase scenes.
the
But
original or the remake?
the remake.
Hmm.
But now that I said that, I'm gonna replace it with Gone in 60 Seconds.
Ooh, that's
Much
cool.
better,
Yeah,
much better heist movie than The Italian Job.
nice. All right.
It is still a classic. I was showing the poster of that to one of my boys the other day because they love cars.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can imagine the colourful minis, yeah, bit of
Yeah.
a cult icon.
Mm-hmm.
And with Gone in 60 Seconds, right? I mean, Nicolas Cage is Nicolas Cage, so
Yes.
you gotta love his movies, even if he's the same person in every movie.
Yes, it's true.
As they say, get the job you like, you never work a day in your life. You just get to be Nicolas Cage.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, great. Yeah, so there's some recommendations for you if you're looking for a good movie to watch. Okay. All right. So just an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. Introductions. We're going to talk about some of the history and expand on zero trust data resilience, and basically just walk through what Vault, some details about Vault, why we would use it, and some of the additions. And there's room for questions at the end too. So yeah, with that, let's pass it on to Michael or Tim. Were you going to speak about this?
Yeah, we can just talk about this openly. So if we think about the history of zero trust, and if we think about data protection as a whole, if we look at how the industry has evolved, these concepts, viruses, ransomware, it's not really anything new. I think one of the things that has really changed the perspective and the wide-reaching damage of it is you used to get viruses to do damage, to disable enemies, that kind of thing, and then with the rise of cryptocurrencies and bits like that, suddenly it's become a way to create an income effectively, and that's where suddenly we've seen this big rise in attacks. I remember my first kind of normal internal IT job for a big organization, and within a few months was dealing with a ransomware attack. So been dealing with this for over a decade now. So the mindset has always been kind of the same. The technologies have just started to change.
Hmm.
So we're talking about worm, whether that's tape, mutability, that kind of thing. Anything you guys want to add to that? What's your perspective? So,
Well, recently I had a conversation with someone about data protection, kind of about what we do in our jobs, and I mentioned that the big thing right now is protecting your backups, and the person was actually like, "Why would you need to protect your backups, right? Like that you have the backups to recover from, but that's now the new target, right?" So this whole concept of zero trust is you know protecting all of your data from production all the way through to DR to protecting your backups. So, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both of these, right? I mean, I remember working for VARs back in the day, and it was about viruses back then. Nobody really had anything else. Security, it was, you Active Directory username and password. That's all you need.
Yep.
Close your firewalls. Like, don't do IP any on your Cisco PIX 501 if you're an SMB. And antivirus software was, you know, good to have. But now you're right. I mean, the evolution of it all to this zero trust, which I know sometimes people think like zero trust is a feature of a software, but it's not a feature. It's a mindset, right? It's a mentality. So
Mhm.
here we are figuring out how to put walls around everything so that this server can't trust this server with microsegmentation, right? Putting backup servers over here segregated, clean rooms, all sorts of gated controls between each device to ensure that there's no way for this one to just implicitly trust anything coming from that particular box or network.
Mhm.
absolutely, and that leads on to kind of the other point of you know, we'd love to say zero trust for anything, but the reality is that we're all using GoToMeeting right now. If you're watching this live with us, or you're watching on YouTube with a web browser, there's code that we do have to trust because it's part of that ecosystem. You've got your operating system, you've got your hardware vendor, and that does tie into looking at whether it's storage, backup solutions, anything really. You've got to trust the vendor knows what they're doing to keep you safe, which is one of the reasons why Vault kind of made a logical sense for Veeam. That Veeam is being trusted as number one in the market for data protection, so they should know how to hopefully do some storage, right?
Yep.
It's we used to say before Vault, right, that Veeam was the one of the largest storage vendors out there because of the way that we would write data, because of the way of the our backup files are written, right, and all sorts of storage that we consume, where we're very well versed in how data gets written, processed, things like that down to disk.
Yeah. Written and read, right? That's
Yep,
the probably more important part. How do you get your data out?
exactly.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Backing up's the easy part. Restoring the data is where you earn your money.
Yes.
That really brings us on to the why, doesn't it, of
Hmm.
Vault, and I kind of alluded to some of it there, but you know the reality is that there are threats that just aren't going away, and we've seen this for a long time really with service providers. And as someone that used to work for a service provider myself, I would always say to customers that it is good to be able to store a copy of your data somewhere outside your jurisdiction. When I think about when I was at an SMB, my options were tape or USB. And straight away, I've got a lack of redundancy with those items. I've got a lack of speed. I've got a lack of simplicity in some ways as well, especially with USB, because you're talking rotating, you're trying to make sure the right drive's there. I've even had the emergency replacement I've had to do because the MD's dropped the USB in the car park on the way in on concrete, and then suddenly the USB is rattling, and it's not meant to do that. So moving to something like a service provider has been a good option for a lot of people. Or as these hyperscale clouds have started to become more popular, the ability of storing data elsewhere. And my argument would always be, it doesn't matter then if you're compromised, if your data provider hasn't been compromised. You have created a virtual air gap without the need to carry tapes or USBs across car parks or any of the physical interventions and mistakes that can go with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you talked about dropping the USB. The ones I've experienced was the tape person leaving the tapes in their car in the middle of June in the summer. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know where that one's going. So,
Absolutely, absolutely. I got pulled into a ransomware event a good few years ago now. It was like in the kind of regional news, and I was just boots on the ground response because this client had no idea what to do. They'd never had a ransomware attack before. The staff had no idea what they were dealing with, and sometimes you realize that actually the ignorance is bliss can really come to bite you. And this was a case of a tape library that was about 10 years old. 5 years prior to the event, it had chewed up a tape, and they'd dismantled it themselves. They'd taken this tape out, and then they put it back together and carried on using it for another 5 years. And they did lose data because as much as we managed to get it professionally cleaned up, there were tapes that had not been written to properly, and without that verification, they didn't know those tapes were bad, and that had massive consequences for them. Thankfully, they're still going today. They managed to get data back, but they did certainly have some data loss there.
yeah.
So
So, oh, go ahead, Hin.
no, that was it. I was just
Oh,
yeah. So should we talk about the vault, the different editions?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And I think the why kind of goes
Mhm.
right into that. So, why this offering? Why this backup as a service or storage really? VDC is our backup as a service, our BaaS solution that covers a handful of things, but Vault was in addition to that. And why do we want customers to go to Vault, or why, and more importantly, would a customer want to go to Vault? And I always like to say, it's simplicity, security, and scalability, right? So anybody can go out to Azure, and also, AWS, and then whatever other object storage you have out there. And sure, you might have, Azure Cloud admins or AWS Cloud admins, or it might be, this is our first foray into it, and you might not necessarily know about all the different ways to secure your data up there. But the nice thing is with a solution like Vault, that's all done. You don't have to worry about that. You have a company that's holding petabytes of data, knows how to secure it, constantly is looking for anything happening in the environment, right? Any um, incidents or anything that potentially could be an incident, right? And so it just means that security is done for you by a company that has more staff and more capabilities to do so. So that kind of goes, simplicity and security there, but scalability as well, because we've got Vault up in Azure. We've had conversations before with the Azure storage admins, and we'll tell them, look, we need to do, this customer needs to do 1.2 petabytes of change data per day. And they'll just laugh and they'll be like, well, that's all? So it's funny comparing different on-premises or different object storage to, somebody like Azure who has exabytes of information and capability out there. And so to scale this is really a non-issue. And that's
Absolutely.
where, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as techies here, you kind of remember how tech has grown over time. And I remember, when I first got like an 80 gig hard drive, and I was like, how am I going to fill this thing? And then the next time I'm shopping, it was a 500 gig hard drive. And next thing you know, I've suddenly got terabytes of flash, and I'm going to have to start breaking into the petabytes soon enough, aren't I? And that becomes more of an end user SMB perspective. And exactly as you say there with Azure, the amount of data they're dealing with per second is shocking. And that's why we use the term, hyperscale, hypercloud, because they truly are.
Yeah. And even when your on-premises data footprint isn't that large, maybe you're 500 terabytes. Well, if you have a retention of keeping 7 years worth of data, maybe in like GFS points, right? But maybe let's say 90 days of dailies and then having a GFS of years. Well, 500 terabytes of data will quickly grow for a requirement for backup storage. Even with that compression and deduplication, that's going to be a lot of data. And so it doesn't make sense for customers to pay, manage, support on-premises storage that far exceeds their production data storage.
Absolutely. And as I said during my intro, I'm mainly doing Microsoft 365. And, from the Veeam Data Cloud perspective there's the unlimited storage built in. And one of the conversations I always have is it's about the long term. And if you were to pick any article about data over the past decade plus, I'd be willing to bet even more than that. It's always data growth. And then there'll be some buzzword in there. It'll be, explosive data growth. It will be unprecedented data growth. The idea is that no one really is sat there going, my data set is getting smaller and smaller. My data set is getting bigger. Potentially, I'm not noticing it the same because it's sprawling, but it's certainly not shrinking for most organizations out there.
Yeah, and continuing on with that, the durability and availability of that data, it just keeps going higher and higher as well. So comparing that to on-premises storage or other particular places to put your data compared to, let's say, Azure, which is where we're hosting Vault. I mean, 11 nines of data durability. So you've got your nines of availability and you've got your nines of durability as well. So is the service accessible? And then is your data safe? Is it not suffering from bit rot, right? So they're looking for those sorts of things. All the backend storage is put in a way to minimize any chance of corruption of that data, right?
Yeah.
And so, with us going with Azure, we decided to go with these two additions. And so we have Foundation and Advanced, right? And they're both on the cool tier, which sometimes people stumble at that one. They're like, well, why don't you put Advanced on the hot tier? And the long and short of it is, it's on the same drives. Hot and cool in Azure are on the same set of hardware, same set of drives, same performance. The only difference is the API cost, right? So storage and API costs. Well, that's all taken care of by Veeam, right? So you're paying for consumption. With Advanced, you're not paying for any API costs for immutability, anything like that. So you're going to get the same performance on Azure Cool as if you would on Azure Blob. The redundancy of these, like I talked about those nines, right? So Advanced, we've got that zone redundancy, and Foundation is just the local redundancy, right? That particular data center or availability zone, right? So you still have 3 data centers within an availability zone that your data is across, as opposed to, right, ZRS, where you've got different zones available to you.
Is that zone redundancy dependent on the region?
Yeah, so we'll see in a little bit. There's all sorts of different regions. I think we have a slide showing that map that we can have your vault deployed to.
Mm-hmm.
What's really interesting is we'll be able to see by some of those features aren't quite available and why potentially only Foundation is available in that particular region.
Yeah.
And honestly, the difference between that, right, is with Foundation, we choose the region. Veeam as a company chooses the region. Now you get to choose the country. So, if you're in the United States, you choose, I want to store my data in the United States. We're going to place it in a data center that makes sense for cost, for, many different reasons. But with Advanced, I'm going to sneeze. But with Advanced, you get to select the data center. So it makes a lot of sense for customers who need their backup storage super close to either their on-premises environment or more likely to their existing Azure environment. So if they have a large Azure presence of workloads in US East 2, then it might make sense for their on-premises backups to go to Vault in US East 2 as well. That way, if they needed to do a quick restore into Azure, they're going within the same region, and that will be the fastest restore possible. But both of them are required to be immutable, no option to turn that off, and required to be encrypted, no option to turn that off as well. And so that's the Veeam encryption, right? So you would provide your encryption key, and then we also would encrypt that on the back end, so your data is double encrypted.
All right.
I've got a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind, dear. Just, to talk about these use cases, because we've got here foundation, secondary backups, advanced, primary or secondary, and we can see that read restore, that fair use versus unlimited. So the first question I'd just like to get your opinion on really is, foundation as this fair usage percentage. How do we make sure that we're getting the most value out of that? How are we extracting the most functionality, and what's Veeam doing really for that?
Yeah, the first thing I talk about when somebody's looking at foundation is let's see what your use case is, right? So we definitely want to know, are you looking for this to be primary backup storage and you don't have any other backup storage? Foundation might not be the best because you would want to have options like Sure Backup, different things like that, where you're going to read all of your restores are going to come from here. So you're probably going to hit that fair use policy. But if it's going to be a secondary location or some sort of tertiary backup, right? More than likely, the majority of your restorations are probably going to come from your primary repository. Maybe this is going to be Foundation will be the capacity tier of a SOBR that you have, a scale out backup repository. So if you do happen to do restores from that, the nice thing about the way Veeam works with object storage is we're not going to restore back that entire thing back on premises and then, okay, I just need this chunk. We're going to grab just the chunks that we need. We know it's up there with the metadata, so we're going to intelligently grab those chunks. Even with instant VM recovery, right? You can do instant VM recovery from object storage. And so we're going to intelligently grab those chunks and intelligently assume which chunks we're about to read or which would need to be readed next, especially when it comes to the operating system chunks. So that makes your instant VM recoveries a lot faster. So, Foundation's a great choice for customers that are not going to be using it heavily for those restorations, but they can be, at least comforted by the fact that when we are touching that object storage, we're touching it minimally to make sure that you don't get up to that fair use limit.
Now,
Are there any
let's
warning when you're approaching that limit?
Yeah, there'll be warnings as well, and I think the EULA states right that we reserve the right to bill for overages. So that's up to that department of how they're gonna bill overages. But as far as I know, I don't think I've seen anybody actually hitting that fair use policy yet, because they're using it in the way that Foundation was intended to use, not as that primary source if I'm going to touch this data a lot.
And that's the key thing there. It's making sure that it's fit for purpose. So
Yeah.
inversely, let's go to complete other end. Say I've shelled out the extra for advanced and I want to get my money's worth. Okay, we've talked a lot about restore, sure backup, and that. If you were a customer and you wanted to get the most out of advanced, talk to me about what you'd do. How would you play with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think advanced makes the most sense when you're wanting to test those backups. Obviously, right? We mentioned sure backup. Make sure we can spin up those VMs, or if we're going to do something like a Veeam Orchestrator, right? Our Veeam Recovery Orchestrator VRO, where we can orchestrate recoveries to Azure. Now, those orchestrated recovery to Azures don't have to be an actual DR event. We can take your backups to a restore to Azure. That Azure environment or Azure networks can be segregated out. So essentially, it's like doing testing, or for QA, or for any other thing that you might need to touch those servers for, even patch testing.
Like pre-patching. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
So, we can restore those directly into Azure. Doesn't matter what region it's in because you don't have to worry about egress. You don't have to be concerned about I'm right here. I need to make sure it's right there. So for customers that maybe have a diverse Azure presence, or maybe they're using AWS for the machines, right? And they want to back up, they want to have their backup data not in AWS, but they want to have it in another platform. So advanced would make a whole lot of sense there because you're definitely, it definitely would consume egress for everything because you're not going to have, let's say, an Azure environment in that region, which is another way to get around the egress, right? But that's the nice thing about advanced is you don't have to worry about egress anymore. You don't have to worry about API calls. You don't have to worry about the block generation for immutability and how that's going to affect my bill next month as well. You just pay for storage. And you can
Okay.
advance just like any other object storage that Veeam can write to, even on-premises object storage.
That's a great point, and it reminds me of back when I was internal IT and I had to do an Exchange upgrade project. And after having fingers burnt previously on it, I decided to spin up completely in isolation with Sure Backup, and I had my AD, I had my Exchange, and I tested that entire upgrade process because I did naturally hit a couple of snags where that would have caused me some real headaches. So I could pre-plan in the production and trial that out. Now, back then, I didn't have the bandwidth to do anything like that, and it's amazing to see the options that even SMBs can start to get access to, where they can spin this up in the cloud and rather than having to worry about having all these extra hosts and all these extra cores and RAM, I can just consume for that little bit and just throw it away. It's amazing how tech's changed in the past decade or two, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's true. And I'll do the plug too for Orchestrator again, VRO, right? It's so nice to be able to build a testing schedule, a plan, or recovery plans ahead of time so that you can not worry about the testing, right? You can just set it up, get an email every day if you need to.
Yeah, the
And
report.
so Orchestrator is completely supported with Vault, or I should say Vault is supported with Orchestrator.
Yeah.
That's a great point. So if
Mhm.
we jump onto the next slide there, so you were right, Tim. We've got the region. So let's have a look at them.
Yeah. So, right, we've got the advanced and the foundation, and see if the map's going to come up here.
I
I'm
am
not seeing
trying.
that slide move over.
Okay, hold on.
No worries.
There we go. That's it, right?
All
Cool.
right. Yeah. So you can see here we have the concept of core regions, and then we have the concept of non-core regions, which are not necessarily, they're not shown on this map at all. But these are essentially as of, and this might already be 3 months old, the core regions that we have available, right? And as Azure adds more locations, we can easily expand into those. And you'll notice you see a little purple F and a little green A for foundation and advanced. So places like, West US2, East US2 are going to have both of those as well. But if we look down to like, say, Zurich, right, for Switzerland North, you'll see that only foundation is available. Well, the reason for that is they don't have enough data centers to make ZRS capable. So our options there are just that local data center redundancy. We don't have the ability to, extend past that because Azure doesn't have that infrastructure there. Um, and then we also have some non-core regions, which may or may not have both foundation and advanced as well. But these are usually only requested by customers if they have a very specific, very, very specific data center that they need to be in that's not in here. And usually those are data centers that cost a little bit more money as far as Azure is concerned because they haven't developed out So our non-core are going to be a slightly different cost to customers based on as opposed to the core regions. But again, it's still, if you have that requirement, it's still going to be cheaper than rolling your own because now you're just paying for consumption and not worrying about API, egress, and all that.
And what I will just add to that as well is on Veeam's website, there is a more up-to-date list of the core and non-core region availability there. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on that one if it's something you're in the market to shop about with. Because as you've said, Tim, this map's already a few months old. I believe we've already got more regions on there than what we're showing.
Yeah, I've just come to the conclusion that this list won't matter to me. If I get asked, let's go to the website and see because it changes so much and there's more additions. It
Yeah.
seems like almost weekly.
And Microsoft's making their changes too, right? So some of these might have the advanced available soon, or maybe now. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
That's it. And Microsoft have got multiple approaches here. They're going to bring more regions online, but they're also going to expand existing capabilities. So what might not be able to support, a ZRS today suddenly could support ZRS in 12, 18 months from now. So as Microsoft extend those capabilities, then we will naturally inherit that and offer that out to the customers.
Again, it's that scalability that customers don't need to worry about anymore.
So I'm conscious we've done a lot of talking about Vault and we've not actually shown anything yet. So if we jump ahead here, we've got a couple of screenshots of the Vault console. Are you happy to kind of talk us through these a little bit, Tim?
Yeah. So some screenshots here instead of a live demo because those may or may not go well, right? Based off of my internet connection and bandwidth. But there's not necessarily a need to even show a live demo of it because this is the Vault console, right? This is the UI that you log into. You go to my.veeam.com, log in with your veeam.com credentials, and if you have a Vault subscription, you'll be able to come into this Vault console. And you can see in this account, a demo account, there's two different vaults. One's in central, or they're both in central US, right? And we can see a quick consumption graph of both of those. And there's not a whole lot to do here because, quite frankly, there's not a whole lot that anybody needs to do here. We can view the consumption and we can add another vault. What I like about the add another vault is you're not paying for another vault. When you purchase a vault subscription, you're paying for, let's say, we'll just go with 1 petabyte. Let's say you're going to do a 1 petabyte vault. That's 1 petabyte across one vault, 5 vaults, 10 vaults. A vault in US East and a vault in US West. It doesn't matter. It's all going to consume that same 1 petabyte, and you can deploy as many as you need for whatever purposes you have.
Let's elaborate on that point a bit then, because in terms of scale, the questions that would come to mind back when I was a consultant were, what about if I'm, an international organization, if I need data in multiple regions, if I've got multiple VBR servers, how does Vault play with that?
Yeah, so let's go one more slide. And this is the my.veeam.com portal, right? Where you're used to going in, getting your licenses, you'll see keys, support resources. But if you haven't noticed now, there's this cloud management. And we've got backup servers and vaults. So here, if you want to manage one of these vaults or add a new vault, it takes you onto that vault admin page that we just saw. But here's where we're going to see that we have, two vaults. Again, this is a different screenshot showing different regions. You see one's non-core, one's core, one's foundation, one's advanced. But what I like about this is you see backup servers right above it. When we're attaching these to your VBR environments, it's intelligent enough, right, to know which VBR it's registered to. And so if you're spinning up multiple vaults, we can easily say, this vault on the top is only accessible to this VBR server. So this vault, in our US East is only going to be attached to this VBR in US East. This vault server over in a European region is only going to be available to the resources of, VBR and vault in that same region. And that helps with that zero trust ability as well. So even if that admin over there in that other region was attempting to add a vault in, those vaults would be marked as not accessible to them. So none of the vaults that show up would be accessible. And it's not in the screenshot here, but there's a little 3-dot menu. You click on that, and that's where you can assign or unassign vaults to VBR servers.
And you can have multiple vaults attached to the same VBR, and inversely, can't you? One vault, multiple VBRs.
Right. Yeah. So I don't normally recommend the one vault to multiple VBRs because we have the ability, right, to create multiple vaults. But there's a lot of times when it can make sense if you're ever going to attempt to restore data to another location, right? Or maybe it's some sort of a DR scenario where your original VBR is gone, spin up another VBR, attach this cloud repository, proceed with your restorations. And so it's not beholden to just that single VBR. And likewise too, if we move on to, I think, the next screen, we're going to talk about the VBR integration. It's not going to be what you're used to for attaching storage accounts. Normally, when you add object storage, right, it's a storage account. You've got a storage account name if it's Azure, and you've got a secret key, which is a long string of gobbledygook that nobody's going to memorize. They just copy it out. If they forget it, they generate a new key, right? But that's not always very secure. What if somebody takes that key? What if somebody writes it down? What if that key gets compromised? You might not know it until it's too late, right? So with Vault, what we're doing is an app registration. And what that does, right, if you're familiar with anything M365 or anything Azure, right, app registrations are essentially gateways into that particular environment with more granular controls of just instead of just that storage account name and a key. And so here, when you go to add Vault in, you'll see a specific option for Vault. And normally it would say, you are not authorized. And you click the authorized button the very first time. It says, okay, let's log in with your my.veeam.com account. And hopefully everybody has already gone into their my.veeam.com account and enabled MFA. Because again, zero trust, right? We need extra security. Everybody should have MFA on everything.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to log in with your my.veeam.com account. And once you do that, it's going to create the app registration. Your VBR server will now be in that managed VBR server list that we saw on the previous screen. And then in here, we're going to see a list of all the vaults that are allowed to be consumed by this. So any new vault that is created that's not assigned to another VBR will show up in here. And if you've got ones that are already assigned to other VBRs, by default, they will not show up in here unless you explicitly go in and allow them to. So now it's simple. You've created your vault, which was 2 clicks, choose what region essentially and where it's going to be, and what nickname you're going to give it. And then you'll see it here in the list. No need to keep track of those keys, no need to do anything else. And what you'll notice is in our cloud accounts area in passwords and that, which I think we have on the next slide, you'll see that we have the VBR registration here. So you might be used to seeing like that bottom one is Azure Compute. That's if you add in an Azure Compute environment, maybe if you're going to use VBR to do a directory store to an Azure VM. But you'll see too, you've got my different vaults listed there, specifically with the description of Veeam Data Cloud Vault. That's the actual app registration credentials. So you can come in here if for whatever reason this VBR needs to be decommissioned or doesn't need to be attached to the Vault anymore because maybe you used the Vault to have your backup management go from one location to another. You can come in here and revoke this, simply remove it. That removes the app registration as well, and it removes it from that managed list out on your my.veeam.com. So if you were to connect this one back in, you'd have to go through the process again of relogging in, recreating the app registration, which is done automatically for you, but you can unregister any VBR that you need to. And ensure, right, that they're securely registered into your vault.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I like that. I like that. It makes it easier and more secure, which is pretty rare.
Yeah, I mean, we've really tried to make it as easy as possible to consume, right? Not worrying about security.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, everybody should be security conscious, but not worrying about the details that they would have to if they managed it on their own.
Mhm.
Not worrying about where they're going to, how they're going to handle redundancy, right? Not
Mhm.
worrying about the scalability of it. We try to make it easy to just consume and expand.
And that is it. It's that ease of use, that ease of adoption, and the fact that you know that all these vaults are built templated. It's a common security framework there. It's not like you place the order and someone from Veeam's trying to click all these buttons in the background to make this happen. This is, this is true automation at scale. And I've seen it before when, as I say, I was a consultant and I'd given a spec sheet because quite often the backup administrator, if you look at the different roles that backups and data protection has sat in over time, it used to be the kind of backup would sit with storage, and the storage guy was kind of just doing a copy to make sure because they knew that if the RAID fails or anything like that, we need to have a copy. And then over time, it's moved towards data security, and as more of these different SaaS offerings and public cloud and containers, pick a technology has kind of grown. Suddenly, we're talking this backup administrator, they can't know every single tool and every application.
Yeah.
And object storage is just one of those things again that, you have a look at Veeam and we say, yeah, you can back up all of your data to object storage. And they go, okay, great. I don't know what that's going to cost me. I don't know how to size it, what the performance looks like. I don't know
Yeah.
what good looks like to build it. And you go speak to someone from the, Azure administrator within your organization, and they'll say, okay, how do you want it? And you're just going to say fast and full of objects. I want immutable. I like immutable. And that's it. There's so much more nuance to it. And I remember once before building a spec sheet of this is the exact configuration that I need it to be. And even then, someone made a mistake. And back before Veeam supported immutability for Azure storage, someone had created an immutable storage effectively. So it was an unsupported state, which then meant, well, the only way to fix that, you've got to reseed. Which brings me on to something I'd love to talk about as well, Tim, migration of data. Because currently, if someone's already using Azure directly and they say, right, well, I want to move my data, what options are available to them?
Yeah, that's the nice thing is we don't need any special tools to do a migration, right? There's nothing additional. We don't have a Vault migration executable, some sort of extra software we download, right? It's made to be consumed in VBR. It's object storage in VBR. So, you can move backups between them with the Veeam mover is the more the code name of it, but right, the move backups, if you see it in the console. The more common one, however, is consuming Vault in a sober. So if you have an existing sober, maybe you've got some on-premises object storage that you've been backing up to for the last 3 to 5 years, and your hardware cycle time is coming up, and you found it's more cost effective to go to Vault instead of trying to repurchase more object storage on premises. Well, you can add in Vault into your capacity tier where your current object storage is, put that other capacity tier in maintenance mode or seal it really. Um, and then so that way no new backups can go to it. And then you can evacuate that tier. And what that's going to do is take all that data and move it across. The other nice thing about that method is if for some reason you do have non-encrypted backups on premises, right? Vault requires encryption. So when they're in a sober like that, you can set the encryption settings on that particular tier or that particular object storage within the sober. So you can have encryption set for Vault, which is required, and you can evacuate still into that. And that's when encryption is going to happen. So you don't have to worry about, well, it's not encrypted, so I can't move it to Vault. There's ways to get it in there because Veeam can encrypt it on the fly as it's transitioning between those those two extents.
Yeah. That's great because yeah, the encryption on the fly is definitely a game changer there, right?
Yeah.
So
Another thing that really impressed me when I was looking into it is, a pick on Azure specifically because we're running on Azure. However, if you think about okay, I want to migrate my data. If I'm already in object storage, depending on the provider, there might be, API charges for reading the data. There might be egress fees, but the data is already within Azure specifically. It's actually possible in quite a few scenarios to migrate that data without having the egress fees by the use of, service endpoints, and if you're using a gateway that's already within that region, bits like that. So one of the former Veeam 100, now actually a Veeam employee as well, Ben Young, he created a bit of a walkthrough to explain how to do that migration. I believe it's on YouTube now and on the community, and maybe once we post this, we'll actually put a link in the comments as well for that. But yeah, it's very exciting to see that work.
Yeah, and honestly, the migration question gets asked more than this next one, but this next one does come up a lot with enterprises. ExpressRoute. Do you support ExpressRoute? Right? So, yes, we do. Right? And there's two ways to go about it. There's the method where it's Microsoft peering, which is essentially, you've got an ExpressRoute up there. If you have Microsoft peering enabled, essentially your internal DNS knows that for anything that is like storage endpoints or things like that, you're going to forward that through the express route, without private IPs. You don't need that private link peering, right? Because you can't do a private IP or a private endpoint on a vault because it's within Veeam's cloud, not yours. But with that Microsoft peering, that allows the on-premises to essentially access the back end through your express route instead of going out to the internet and then back down into Azure. Now, if you don't have Microsoft peering enabled, and maybe your organization uses ExpressRoute but is set up just for private links, right? You've got private links for your own storage accounts, things like that. Well, we certainly don't want that data to still traverse through the internet if you have a dedicated ExpressRoute that you want to consume. So the easiest way is, we've had for some time gateways and mount servers within VBR. Throw a gateway up there, add Vault into your console, set that gateway server, that gateway VM that's in Azure as the gateway for that Vault. Maybe set it as the mount server as well. Well, now your VBR traffic is going across ExpressRoute to go from proxy to gateway. That's IP to IP. It's not talking to Microsoft services at all. And then from there, when it goes to talk to Vault, it will use your global storage endpoint in Azure automatically to just traverse right across your VNet directly into the storage API.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Definitely. So I would just say we've kind of gone through the slides there. There's a couple other bits I want to talk about, but I would encourage as well, and they want to ask any questions, please go for it. Yeah, I think it's exciting that there's all these options available, and it's nice to see Veeam kind of take a step into that space now. Is there anything else you really would like to share about Vault? Any stories or case studies that you think are of any particular interest?
I think honestly, right, not that I'm trying to have a sales hat on for this call, but if I take my sales hat off and just think about it, how it when I worked at Avar, right, when I was installing hardware, software for customers, if this would have been available there, I certainly would have jumped on it just because I saw how surprisingly bad a lot of organizations are at security. I still run across customers that use snapshots on arrays. That's their backup. They don't have any other backup. There's a snapshot from this array to that array. That's their backup. I've come across large enterprises of names that you would know that don't have a backup solution at all for this particular platform that they have, which is another platform that everybody would know. And I'm just constantly amazed and shocked by this. And a lot of times it comes across as, well, we haven't got around to it, or we haven't had the expertise, or our organization is so siloed, we don't have resources to that particular group, so we just have to do our best within our silo. And
Yeah.
so, a lot of times we had to try and figure out, when I worked at the bar, like how can we at least enable them with all the restrictions they have within their political organization, right? All those politics. And something like Vault just makes it so much easier because, look, your silo can purchase the software, you've got budget for that. And then you have budget for this. You don't have to worry about an Azure subscription, reoccurring costs to Azure. You don't have to worry about, additional costs that are out of your particular budget that you've planned for. So I would have definitely jumped on Vault. But now that I'm working for Veeam, you should definitely hop on Vault too.
One final story from me on that one really is, again, back from the consultancy days. And you say it's so true. There's enterprise out there, and it's not just SMBs. As much as SMBs will think that enterprise has got it all covered, there's, again, the data sprawl increases, the technical debt increases, and we're all human. We're all trying to do the best we can with the time we got. And sometimes you'll see them say, well, we accept that risk, which is great, until you kind of go, that will have a consequence down the line. And did you really accept the risk, or did you bury your head in the sand? Was it really calculated? I remember reading this blog a while ago, and they talked about the statute of limitations for technical debt. And it was, if you go into a new company, because this is something you'll hear, like, oh, we're unpicking the debt, we're dealing with what the previous IT guy dealt with. And they said the statute of limitations for blaming the previous IT guy, 6 months. Okay, the
That's
first six
it.
months you're getting into the job, you're finding your feet, you find out how everything works. After 6 months, if you have got an issue and you've not even started to address it, that's on you.
It's your bad.
And
Yep.
it is that thing. It's true. It's about the perceptions. Even if you think, yeah, no, I'm getting to that. I've dealt with everything else. From the perception of the peers, of the stakeholders in the business, you've already been in post over 6 months. Normally, that means you pass the probation period. You've had enough time to do your initial discovery, do your analysis. So if you're, 6 months plus into your job and you're going, I still haven't got time to deal with that yet, it is going to come back to you one way or another. So don't accept the risk. Embrace change.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to add to that, just as you're saying, Michael, the as the larger you get, the more complicated things get, right? You have multiple, as Tim was saying, different silos, and then it's a game of broken telephone too, right? Like you have to communicate what you need to another department. They have to understand it. They have to implement it. And then to your point with the technical debt, if you have this many cooks in the kitchen, you can't find out, you can't know everything, and you don't know what you don't know, and that's sort of unknown technical debt. And to your point, Michael, when you're saying that you accept this security risk, you don't know what you're accepting, right? So the more simple we can make it, like as you're saying, Tim, with Vault, the better, right? Like just focus on other things rather than building the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that IT generalist role is slowly disappearing from the ecosystem, right?
mhm,
As like you said, technology gets more and more complicated and sprawls out more and more. The IT generalist role is going to start, drowning trying to keep up with everything.
yeah,
And so if there's solutions out there that allow them to not have to worry about or not have to go learn a new platform or anything like that, it's very easy to jump on those and not have to be concerned about those particular things. And you can get on with the rest of your job dealing with, what the company is paying you to do, right?
right. Yeah. All right. Well, we are coming to the end of this meeting, so I want to open up the meeting. If there's any questions anyone has while Tim is here. I guess not. Well, if you do, you can always reach us on the community. And so just to look ahead, um, in terms of the next series, the next episode in the series, VeeamON is coming up in April 20th or 21st to 23rd. And there's, I'm hearing that there's going to be a lot of VDC announcements there. And we will go through that and distill it and have a meeting to sort of talk about all the new highlights, the new features of VDC. And that'll come probably beginning of May sometime. And yeah, keep
And
your eyes open for other episodes.
and if you're going to be at VeeamON, come say hi to me. I'll be hanging around the booth.
Yeah, I'll be there too. So come say hi to me.
Great.
Yeah,
Don't say hi to me, I won't be there.
Oh,
it's okay. We can say hi to you virtually.
That's it. That's it. Hopefully, we'll get a remote call going for that catch up anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
So really, all that remains for everyone. There's no other questions in there. So just from each of us, really, thank you everyone that's kind of tuned in live, and if you're watching on demand, thank you again for your time. And as my good friend Ksenia would always say, see you in the community.
Sounds good.
thanks.